sole purpose of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is to get aid to the people that need it in Gaza without it getting into the hands of Hamas, where most aid goes to. Most of the aid that's been delivered outside the GHF goes to Hamas, and they use it to raise funds for their own operations, for their terrorist activities, and also to control the population. So it's a game-changing effort, the GHF, and it's been, in my view, phenomenally successful. They've delivered something like 50 million meals in the 1 month they've been operating.
Amazing. We're back now we're almost wrapping the CUFI National Summit. We've had some incredible conversations here in the Standpoint studio backstage. And with us now is Colonel Richard Kemp. He's been a friend for several years, watching the work that he's done, just speaking the truth of what's happening, primarily in Israel with regards to the IDF and in the weeds. These days we live in a society where anything happens and suddenly everybody becomes an expert in that topic, right? So recently the US sends B-2 bombers to attack the nuclear facilities in Iran, and suddenly on Twitter, on CNN, on MSNBC, all over the place, people are experts in trying to understand how deep those missiles penetrated down in the bunker busting bombs, and they know nothing about it. But there are people who are actual experts, and we need to lean on them on certain things, and that's Colonel Kemp. He's also become a friend. He's a great, great person, and got to meet him and his family all over the world on different things. Last week, Colonel Kemp, you were in Gaza, and today you are in Washington, D.C. Let's start with where do you feel more comfortable?
Probably Gaza. It's a bit less dangerous than DC. No, it's I love to be in the United States, in your home territory of Miami or in Washington, wherever. It's a great country.
You spend more time than almost anyone that I'm aware of in Gaza since the war started. You almost didn't leave Israel after the war started, just keeping eyes on what's happening, speaking to the troops. I really want to start with the end and we'll go backwards. Last week, it really struck me. I was happy to see you there. You were in Gaza with a bulletproof vest on in the middle of the aid relief efforts by GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is, my understanding, a U.S. NGO that's distributing food directly to people in Gaza, going around Hamas, who was controlling that food and using that almost as a weapon to control their own people. Tell us what you saw there about what is it that we don't see from the outside about this aid effort and about the people in Gaza.
Well, you're absolutely right that the sole purpose of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is to get aid to the people that need it in Gaza without it getting into the hands of Hamas, where most aid goes to. Most of the aid that's been delivered outside the GHF goes to Hamas, and they use it to raise funds for their own operations, for their terrorist activities, and also to control the population. So it's a game-changing effort, the GHF, and it's been, in my view, phenomenally successful. They've delivered something like 50 million meals in the 1 month they've been operating.
Amazing.
Aiming at around 2 million meals a day and expanding from that. But it's basically, I think we should admire the Americans who are out there running it, and they're pretty much all Americans, ex-military, out there armed, protecting the aid, protecting the people coming to get the aid. And I visited twice. The second time was a few days ago, and the previous time was about a week before that. 2 different aid sites. They've got 4 established in Gaza. And in the 2-hour period that the aid was being distributed to the population, in the first one there was something like, I think 20,000 Gazans came through collecting aid. And the second one was a similar kind of number, I think. I spoke to a lot of the Gazans. I must have spoken at each location to about 50 Gazan civilians collecting the aid. And they were so grateful. Smiling faces. It was a bit chaotic. It was like if you open the doors of a Walmart in Miami. Do you have Walmart in Miami?
We have it, yes.
Opening the doors of Walmart and saying, everything in here is free, get what you want. It would be like that. And that's what it was. But it was nevertheless orderly in as much as the site was protected by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and then beyond the site, IDF providing security. And the people there, the Gazans would come in, they'd get the food they needed, and the GHF staff, these ex-military people, would do their best to avoid confrontation. So they don't want to control it; they want it to be free-flowing, as it were, and only intervene if there's a real emergency. But most of the people I spoke to, so happy to be there. First time they'd ever had free aid since the war began. Many of them told me. Mostly it had been stuff seized by Hamas, sold in the local markets. Often they couldn't afford the prices. Some you heard all the time. I was hearing, and I was right next to these people, among them, and I was hearing, "I love America, I love Trump, I love Donald," because they were
from the Gazans themselves.
From the Gazans, and I've put a video clip of this on my Twitter and Instagram feeds to prove that it's true.
We're going to run it. We're going to run it
right.
with editing on it. Right. It's great.
I love you. I love you, Trump. I love you.
And most people don't believe that, but it's absolutely true. And the other thing that, because they identify these sites with America, and of course the State Department recently announced a $30 million support for the GHF, which is, I think, the start of American funding for it. The rest is, so far, it's been private funding. Other countries need to follow suit. They're not doing so. They're resisting. They're objecting to it. But it's so important. The other things I heard Gazans saying were, "Kill Hamas. I hate Hamas." They understand. They don't love Israel,
right?
But they understand that it's Hamas that's brought them to this situation they're in now, where their homes have been destroyed, where they're short of food, difficult to get water sometimes, difficult just to live. Hamas, they hold responsible for that, and quite rightly, because of course it is entirely due to Hamas, everything that's happening in Gaza. So the other thing that was being said was, we want to get out of Gaza. Virtually everyone I spoke to said they need to get out as soon as possible. They see no future in Gaza. They don't want to stay in Gaza. So this is the mood of the people, very friendly on the whole, very warm relationships between the GHF and the Gazan civilian population. One point I would make, which we all need to know, is that the GHF has met a lot of resistance, primarily from the UN, but then other entities, aid organizations, other countries, they see the UN as being the experts in this field. So if the UN don't like it, it's got to be wrong. And the UN don't like it because it circumvents their procedures, their rules, the template they put on everywhere they deliver aid, which doesn't work in Gaza because it's seized. It doesn't get to the people. It doesn't get to them free.
And it's been proven that the UN's efforts in Gaza have been taken over by Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point I was going to make, is that, so the UN is vehemently opposed to the GHF. The other people that are vehemently opposed to the GHF is Hamas. Hamas and the UN are speaking with one voice on that. I mean, if you think about it, it's extraordinary, but it's true. And many of the people I spoke to and asked about this, they live in fear of Hamas. Hamas have threatened them. They've threatened them not to get aid from these GHF sites. They've killed Gazans. There have been some Gazans working for the GHF, helping as an interface really between the GHF and the population. They've killed at least 8, maybe more of them, Hamas. And it shows how much it hurts Hamas. I think it's potentially a turning point in Hamas's control in Gaza. That's why they dislike it so much. And that's also why the UN don't like it.
Why is it that we don't see any... Well, let me reframe the question. We're seeing the UN is against the distribution. That's clear. Hamas is against the distribution, but the aid is actually getting to the people. But we're not seeing the media cover that at all. In fact, it's always the inverse, right? The first stories that came out when the GHF was launched were these inhumane images, quote unquote, of people waiting in line for food. Like, we wait in line to get into a football game, but them waiting in line for food suddenly was inhumane. So you're seeing those stories. You're seeing stories, false stories of Israeli troops firing upon people just trying to get their food. That comes out at least once or twice a week in some international news source, all of which are false. But we're not seeing the inverse. We're not seeing, have you not seen, was there media embedded with you at the GHF? Why is it that that's their stories, the stories that you were telling, that you posted on your social media? Why are we not seeing that beyond the anti-Semitism with the international media? I mean, these are just great human stories. Why are we not seeing that?
I don't think the media on the whole, I think I'm the only person outside of the GHF and the IDF who've actually gone to one of these bases, or two in my case. I don't think anyone else has done it. And I don't know exactly why that is. I don't know what the policy is. But one thing I do know, I mean, the IDF come under huge criticism because they don't let the international media into Gaza. On the whole, I mean, there have been exceptions to that. But I can understand why that's the case. One, because journalists going into Gaza, particularly if they want to go in not embedded with the IDF, they're at huge risk. And people say, well, that's up to them. If they want to take the risk, they can. But it's not up to them, because what happens when they're kidnapped? Then that becomes an IDF problem. The IDF have got enough problem already dealing with trying to get the hostages out without having more Western journalists as hostages. And the other thing I think, and I'm not quite, I'm surmising this, is that the media, so much of the media distorts so much of what goes on in Gaza, or anything to do with Israel. It's totally distorted. And I think the fear may be that if you let the media in, they will see what they see and they will twist it against Israel somehow. So I think I think those are the two reasons. My guess is that that's why we haven't seen media covering this.
Let's turn a little bit to Iran. We've seen the destruction, or whatever word we want to use, but we're fighting about which word to use to describe it, but the destruction of the nuclear facilities and capabilities of Iran. What impact does that have to the region? But I want to focus actually in the region you come from Europe. What impact does the denuclearization, if we can call it that, of Iran play on the safety and security of people in Europe?
I think it's so important. I mean, the Iranian regime is not just against Israel, not just against Sunni Arab countries in the Middle East, but they're against the entire Western world. And from the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the revolution was based on fighting the West, the great Satan, the United States, and two little Satans, Israel and the UK. The UK specifically is targeted has been targeted by Iran since '79. British troops have been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq by Iran, as Americans have. There have been terrorist attacks aimed at Britain. There was recently, I think just a few weeks ago, there was something like 12, I forget the exact number, Iranians arrested in Britain, accused of planning terrorist attacks. There was a bomb factory back in 2015 in London, which was disrupted by our security services based on Israeli intelligence, planning bomb attacks in the UK. If they can do that, then of course, if they get the nuclear capability and the ballistic missiles to carry the nuclear weapons, then of course they threaten the UK, they threaten Europe, and I don't believe they'd have any more hesitation in using them as they would against Israel. So what Israel's done has been a shield for not just Israel, the Middle East, but for the Western world, for Europe as well. And the thing that I find quite horrifying is that my own country, Great Britain, has not stood up behind Israel on this. I understand that President Trump asked, I don't know this for sure, but I heard that President Trump asked the UK to join the attack on Iran when the Americans sent the B-2s in, and Britain declined. And the Attorney General in Britain said taking part in offensive operations against Iran would be illegal, which is clearly nonsense. So I'm very disappointed that Britain couldn't be at least diplomatically standing up for Israel much more than it did.
Tell me, I mean, I love that you brought that up, because that was my next question had to do with Europe's decision to really just not get involved in this, or the opposite, or really just stand against Israel and even the West, just sort of being quiet. Do you attribute that a lot to, is it the war between Russia and Ukraine that sort of had people fatigued across Western Europe, or is it more just the great immigration of Muslims into Europe and how that's changed the population and the politics of the continent?
Yeah, I think Britain's foreign policy, particularly in relation to Israel and the Middle East, is not based on reality. It's not based on principle. It's not based on the right thing to do. It's based on the impact domestically in domestic politics. And of course, every week and often every day, we see massive protests in the UK on university campuses and the streets against Israel. And the government sees that, of course. They know what's going on. They know that a lot of their voter base and many of their frontline politicians in the Labour Party are extremely anti-Israel, and in some cases pro-Hamas as well. And actually in this war, if you're anti-Israel, you are by definition pro-Hamas. So that's their focus. They don't want, there's an election coming up, not immediately, it's in probably about 3 years. The next election's their focus. And the government has got declining numbers in the polls, with the Reform Party climbing up their back. So they base their foreign policy, they base what they say and what they do about Israel on that domestic concern.
So final question, you're really a national security guy. How do we get, in your estimation, politics in the West, generally speaking, to focus at least a realistic lens on the national security implications of policies that are happening all over the world? So we see Europe taking positions vis-a-vis Iran, Israel, China, etc., from this sort of political, popular lens of it seems like it's being driven by Twitter more than reality, when they're ignoring the national security implications of of the decisions they're making. I know a lot of the work you do has to do with shining a light on the reality from a security perspective of what's happening in the world. How do we refocus, and how do we help you refocus, or help you get the political class to refocus their foreign policy with a realistic lens when it comes to national security?
Well, I think many Western European countries, including Britain, their policies, apart from being focused based on domestic policies, are also based on fear and an unwillingness to actually to stand up for the country. Our country, Britain, and the same applies to other Western European countries, we are self-hating. We don't have the confidence to stand up and say, yes, Britain's a great country and we need to do everything we can to support our country and defend our country critically. And the government, our government currently, because of pressure from President Trump, and the same goes for other NATO countries, have agreed to increase their defense budget to 5% or whatever it is, which is actually a bit of smoke and mirrors, but at least they're trying to build a defense budget a bit. But none of that really matters. It's not, if you've got thousands of tanks, which we don't have, but if we do eventually get loads of combat planes, drones, etc., and anti-air defenses, then it's all pointless unless you've got the political will to use it, and we don't have. It's simple as that. Look at what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine has been allowed to be not overcome yet, but certainly on the losing side at the moment. I hope it doesn't continue, but I fear it will, against Russia. And that could have been different. If President Biden and if the Western European countries had gone all in to support Ukraine, given them what they needed, as much as they needed, to push the Russians back, we could be in a different situation now. But it's this fear thing that comes up again. And also a lack of investment in defense in the West, which has stopped us being able to give all the support we can. As to what we can do about it, I'm very I hate to be defeatist. I'm very skeptical on this. I think the only really effective thing that can happen to change any of this in Western Europe is President Trump leaning very, very hard on them. I think he needs to do that. Our countries value, of course, their relationships with the US. They need that relationship with the US. So I think President Trump, he's put a lot of pressure on already. I think he needs to double down on that pressure to move the dial a little bit. Whether it will happen, whether that dial will move, I don't know, but I think that's the only way of doing it.
We have to reestablish deterrence around the world, military deterrence, because we've had leader after leader in country after country who barks but doesn't bite.
Right.
You know, like whether it's Obama's line in the sand or just go down the list of Western country. Both Netanyahu and Trump have changed that paradigm and saying, look, we actually mean what we say, and if you're gonna cross a line and threaten Western civilization, we're gonna stop you. And I think that's, I'm sure you'd agree, that's something that needs to be reestablished in the West, and just a refocus of, there's actually a war going on against the West.
Yeah.
Like our friend Douglas Murray titled the title of his book, right? I mean, there is a war going on against the West. We have to recognize it to even be able to confront it. So Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you so much. They only give us a certain amount of time. I could speak to you forever. I'm sure we'll continue outside. Thank you for everything.
It's my pleasure.
And thanks for being out there. Everybody watches you with pride, and everyone who knows you appreciates you, as me and my entire family do. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see who we got next as we start wrapping up the Christians United for Israel Summit and our Standpoint studio here. Thanks so much.